I don't need kids. At the funeral, that's what my father, Nick, declared, leaving the other relatives looking at him in disbelief. I'm getting remarried. This time to a younger and more attractive woman. Right, Abby? Oh, Nick, you always say the craziest things. Nick then pulled Abby and another woman's name from among the employees attending, embracing her. Abby seemed happy, clinging to my father's arm. Do you even understand the situation right now? What? My old wife finally kicks the bucket, and it's a day to remember. I glared at my father. Then, Sophia gently put her arm around my shoulder. I'll take care of Candace. I'm not paying any child support. That's fine by me. With those words, Sophia embraced me. From that day, I began living with my aunt and uncle. There was no contact from my father, but about a month later, he suddenly called. Hey. Help me out. Who is this? It's your father. My father is only Ben. I said that and hung up the phone, then blocked the number. Whether he cried or yelled, my father's hell was just beginning. I'll make sure he regrets everything. My name is Candace Reed. I'm a 12-year-old middle school student. I'm just an ordinary girl who loves her mother, like any other. As an only child, I've been able to do any hobby I like, and I think I've been pretty free. My mother is very kind and rarely gets angry. But when she does, it's terrifying. However, I always think it's my fault for doing something bad. Otherwise, we get along very well, and we often go shopping together on weekends. My real father is Nick, a very irresponsible man. It's weird for me, his daughter, to say this, but I've always wondered why my mother married him. I once asked my mother why. She just laughed awkwardly and said, "You'll understand when you're older." Honestly, even as a middle schooler, I didn't understand why she chose him. My father always hung out and never played with me. I was often treated coldly by him and grew to hate him. But I didn't talk about it much because it made my mother sad. Yet, I still had dreams about marriage, inspired by my ideal aunt and uncle. Sophia is my mother's twin sister. She's very kind and sometimes strict, treating me with great affection. Though she's my aunt, she's like a sister to me. And I admire Ben, Sophia's husband, like a brother. They don't have children. Apparently, Ben can't have kids due to an illness he had in the past. Ben was a childhood friend of my mother and Sophia. So Sophia knew about his illness and its aftermath. Despite this, when they decided to marry, my grandparents strongly opposed it. But Sophia defiantly married him anyway, as my mother told me. Therefore, my aunt and uncle were estranged from my grandparents until I was born. After my birth, they reconciled, and now they have a very good relationship. However, my father always mocks Ben. He calls Ben a failure for not being able to have children, and accuses him of marrying for money, utterly despicable things. That's why I despised my father and vowed never to become an adult like him. Right after I entered middle school, my grandparents threw me a celebration party. Their house is very large. They seem to be local landowners, owning several companies. My mother, Sophia, and Ben each run one of my grandparents' companies. In contrast, my father only works as a regular employee in one of their companies. I used to wonder why as a child. But seeing my father's behavior, even I, as a child, understood he could never be entrusted with a company. Yet, he seemed very dissatisfied with this. At the party, while pouring a drink for my grandfather, my father started talking with a smirk. "Well, it's about time you let me take over a company, isn't it? Having the wife as a president and the husband as a subordinate looks bad, right?" The mood, which had been warm until then, suddenly turned cold. I sighed and took a bite of cake. My father, oblivious to the atmosphere, continued. How about this? We swap positions. That would be perfect. Problem solved. This is Candace's entrance celebration. Let's not have such vulgar conversations. Vulgar, you say? My father's shout filled the room. He seemed unable to control his emotions due to the alcohol. His attacks on my calm mother looked utterly ridiculous. Why should I be just a regular employee? I followed proper procedures to get my position. That's what I'm saying. Act more like a wife. My father's words made no sense. Just when everyone was starting to think this was going nowhere, my grandfather spoke up. If we left it to you, the company would be ruined in no time. What? My father's face turned red with anger, but he fell silent at my grandfather's words. In the now quiet room, the grandfather's calm voice echoed. First of all, haven't you forgotten why you are in your current position? Wasn't it because you insulted a crucial client when we were about to entrust you with the company? My father's face turned pale, and he stepped back. The grandfather began to recount the past events slowly, as if speaking to my father. Originally, the company where my father is currently employed was supposed to be headed by him. However, before his appointment could be announced, my father had an affair with the daughter of a very important client. When the client's CEO learned of this, he stormed in. As a result, the client threatened to stop all dealings, nearly driving the company to bankruptcy. Hearing this, I felt embarrassed and pitied my father. But that's a story from 10 years ago. It's past the statute of limitations. Dear, you're not the one to decide the statute of limitations. Interrupting him, my mother spoke sharply, and my father glared at her resentfully. Then, with a click of his tongue, he downed his drink and left the room. Sorry for spoiling the mood of the celebration. No, it's not your fault, Grandpa. The grandfather shook his head and patted my head. With my father gone, we had to restart the celebration without him. From my grandparents, I received an electronic dictionary, a book card from my mother, and the sports shoes I wanted from my aunt and uncle. I was in a great mood. When I returned home with my mother, my father had already arrived. He clicked his tongue loudly upon seeing the shopping bag I was carrying. Must be nice for you, getting everything you want. It's a celebration, that's how it should be. Yeah, my bad. He made a half-hearted apology and went into his study. His attitude dampened my spirits, but the gifts I received still made me very happy that night. Later, my aunt and uncle invited me to go on a summer vacation trip with them. Apparently, they were planning a trip abroad and decided to invite me too. My mother, who had a business trip on those dates, happily sent me off. I thought my father would be displeased when he found out. But surprisingly, he was positive about it. Oh, that's great. Have a nice trip. I'll be on a business trip anyway. It seemed that my father also had a business trip during the same period. I was prepared for some sarcasm from him, so this was unexpected. My father, who always complained about work, was happily preparing for his trip. Although it felt odd, I didn't pay much attention to it, excited about my own trip. I enjoyed the trip with my aunt and uncle. The scenery was beautiful, and the food was delicious. It was a luxurious trip. Candace, is there anywhere you want to go? How about we go shopping together tomorrow? Really? Can we? But what about Ben? When I looked at Ben, he nodded with a smile. I was so happy, I hugged Sophia. Then she hugged me back. Candace, you're such a cuddle bug no matter how old you get. I'm not a cuddle bug, I'm a middle schooler. Sorry. She apologized but kept smiling. The next day, as planned, we went shopping. Ben had left earlier, saying he had something to do. Wow, amazing. This one is cute too. Sophia and I were excitedly browsing through the shops. When our hands were full of shopping bags, we sat down at a terrace for a drink. While enjoying delicious cakes, we were having a great time talking. Suddenly, Sophia fell silent and stared intently at one spot. "What's wrong, Sophia?"
Ah.
Following Sophia's gaze, I gasped. There was Nick, wearing a flamboyant aloha shirt, flirting with a young woman. That man. Wait, Sophia. It's okay, right? Sophia looked like she was about to confront Nick. Nick's infidelity was not new, it had happened repeatedly since I was little. At times, he even took me along to meet his mistresses. I loved my mother and was furious at my father, and after that, he stopped taking me along. With such a past, my feelings towards my father's infidelity were just resignation. I'll tell Mom. For now, let's just ignore it. Candace. Alright, let's just take a picture and send it to your mother. Sophia took a photo and sent it to my mother. Although I was curious about how my mother would react, I assumed it would just end with her scolding him as usual. However, just before we were due to return home, my grandmother called with unbelievable news. Candace, calm down and listen. Your mother, she's been in an accident and has passed away. What? I was stunned and dropped the phone. Sophia picked up the phone and heard the same thing from my grandmother. And then she broke down crying. Later, Ben talked to my grandparents on the phone, but Sophia and I could only cry. We returned home and went straight to the hospital where my mother was taken. The moment I saw my mother in the hospital, I burst into tears. Mom. No. Sophia collapsed from the shock. While Ben took care of her, I heard the story from my grandparents. My mother had jumped into the road to save a child, taking the hit herself. The impact of being hit by a car caused severe injuries as she hit the asphalt. And by the time she was brought to the hospital, it was already too late. The child involved only had minor scrapes and no serious injuries. As I heard this, I was just standing there, stunned. By the way, where is Nick? We can't get in touch with him. Hearing my grandparents talk, I told them that my father was abroad. I also mentioned his affair with another woman. Upon hearing this, my grandfather was furious. It was 2 days after my mother had passed away when they finally reached my father. By then, the wake had ended, and the funeral was about to begin. Dying to save a child, what a stupid way to go. How can you say something like that? But it's true, isn't it? Everyone, including me, glared at my father, who said this without any shame. Despite the stares, he casually took his seat as if he were the chief mourner. You don't belong there. What? I'm the chief mourner. Upon hearing this, my father reluctantly moved from the chief mourner's seat to the back. It was after the funeral service had ended. My father suddenly stood up, went over to my mother, and threw his wedding ring at her. What are you doing? Well, this is the end between us, right? No need to be considerate anymore. Saying this, he burst into loud laughter. Now I'm free. Then, pointing at me with a half smile, he boldly declared, I don't need a kid. The other relatives looked at my father in disbelief, as if they couldn't believe what he had just said. I'm going to remarry, you know. This time to a younger and more attractive woman, right? Abby. Oh, Nick, you always say the craziest things. From among the employees attending, my father called Abby and another woman's name and embraced her. Abby, looking pleased, clung to my father's arm. Do you even understand what's going on? What? It's a day to remember that my old wife finally kicked the bucket. I glared at my father. Then, Sophia gently put her arm around my shoulder. I'll take care of Candace. I'm not paying any child support. That's fine by me. Sophia said that and hugged me. From that day, I started living with my aunt and uncle. There was no contact from my father, but about a month later, he suddenly called. "Hey, help me out." "Who is this?" "It's your father." "My father is only Ben." I said this and hung up the phone, then blocked the number. Whether he cried or yelled, my father's hell was just beginning. I'll make sure he regrets everything. After I blocked him, my father seemed to have called various relatives. However, none of the relatives who knew about the events at the funeral would talk to him. He was blocked by everyone he called and finally stormed into my grandfather's company. I happened to be delivering something I had forgotten at my grandfather's company. So I heard my father shouting in front of the president's office, utterly dismayed. "Father. That was just a moment of madness. You are the man who, in his madness, threw a ring at his deceased wife." After my grandfather's words, there was a moment of silence behind the door. He must be struggling with an excuse. And my feeling was right. Well, I was just confused. I didn't mean any harm. I was just upset because I loved her. Disgusting. I couldn't help but let out those words at his absurd explanation. And my father, with his keen ears, caught it. "Hey, Candace. Are you there? Tell your grandfather for me. I loved your mother." "Loved her, you say?" I was so angry I could faint. My grandfather patted my shoulder and nodded at me. I took a deep breath and then answered back to my father. "Grandpa, everything he says is a lie. He never loved Mom or me. Don't joke with me. Come out here." My father yelled and banged on the door from the other side. But that wouldn't stop me from speaking my mind. He was always cheating, making Mom sad. And never said anything nice to me. He's not a father. Hearing my words, my father became even angrier. And finally, he kicked the door open. "Who do you think has been raising you all this time? If you're going to talk nonsense, then pay back all the education expenses right now." At that moment, I was sure his real interest was money. My mother had left a will. It stated that as compensation for his infidelity, he would not receive any inheritance. You say pay back, but you never contributed to her upbringing. It's all written in the will. Meddling in unnecessary things. My father spat out those words in annoyance. My selfish father was giving me a headache. And then he said something even more unbelievable. "I won't divorce. So, as the parent, I should manage the money of my minor daughter, right?" Huh. I let out a voice of utter disbelief. After all, it was my father who had said he wanted a divorce. And the dissolution of the marriage had already been accepted. This meant that the divorce between my father and mother was finalized. "What are you talking about?" "Shut up. Children shouldn't speak out of turn." "Father-in-law. That's fine, right? I'll tell the office that the documents I submitted before were a mistake. It's impossible to simply retract documents that the office has already accepted. Even I, a middle schooler, understand that. Why can't my father? You and she are now just strangers. The office won't accept such a one-sided application. No, she and I loved each other. It will surely be fine." My father's overly confident words made both my grandfather and me laugh, looking at each other. We could feel my father getting irritated on the other side of the door. "Don't making fun of me. Hey, didn't you know? Mom said she wanted a divorce." "What? She did?" His voice sounded as if he had been struck by lightning. I decided to answer him. "You know, on the overseas trip, you were in the same place as Dad, right? It was a coincidence. But when I told Mom, she said she wanted a divorce. There was sudden silence from the other side of the door. Then, I heard the sound of him sniffling. It seemed like my father genuinely believed that my mother wouldn't divorce him. And he started crying from the shock. Why a divorce? She loved me, even forgave me for cheating, why? Maybe she reached her limit? My words, hitting the nail on the head, made him cry even more, audible through the door. Even then, I couldn't feel any sympathy for my father. Anyway, it's time for you to leave today. What? Wait. What the hell, you guys? Let go. It seemed the security had arrived, as I heard a commotion. And then silence followed on the other side of the door. My grandfather and I sat down, taking a breath. What did my daughter see in that man? I've wondered that too. We both sighed and looked at each other, starting to laugh involuntarily. After laughing for a while, my grandfather contacted the company's lawyer and went to the police. My father was served with a restraining order. He complained bitterly, but apparently, he couldn't be forceful with the police and eventually accepted it. Then, a few days of peace returned. I was very sad that my mother wasn't there. But thanks to Sophia being with me, I was a little distracted. Candace, shall we go shopping?
Yeah.
It was when we went to a nearby department store to buy things needed for my move to Sophia's house. From a distance, a shabby-looking man approached.
Ah.
Dad. I screamed as he suddenly grabbed my arm. The man with messy hair and dirty clothes was my father. His eyes were bloodshot as he pleaded. Hey, I just need $10,000, no, $1,000. Give me some money. We're family, right? I forcefully shook off his hand. He fell on his buttocks but soon clung to my leg. Let go. Give me the money. Give it to
me.
The father in front of me had none of the cleanliness he had when we lived together. His shirt was dirty and stained with mud, and he seemed to have not bathed for days. I haven't eaten anything for 2 days. I want to take a bath and eat. Please. No, impossible. Why don't you go to that woman? As I dismissively said that, he answered while crying. Don't say that. She ran off with a younger man when she found out I had no money. I was kicked out of the house, I have nowhere to go. I almost blurted out as serves you right, but managed to hold back. Beside me, Sophia was shaking with anger. How dare you say that? You cheated with another woman and abandoned Candace. I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean any harm. That makes it even worse. Sophia's face was red with anger and tears in her eyes. I held her hand tightly and spoke to my father. I've been adopted. Sophia is now my official mom. So, you're a stranger to me now. My dad is Ben. Adopted. My father froze, wide-eyed. He had abandoned his middle school daughter. It was something that should have been easily foreseen. I despised my father for not understanding such a simple thing. If you're adopted, the inheritance won't come to me. No, there was never any inheritance for you in the first place. You should be grateful you're not being charged compensation. As I bluntly stated, my father's face wrinkled with anger. You. That's disrespectful to your father. I'm the reason you were born. You should be grateful and devoted to me. The surrounding crowd began to murmur as my father finally revealed his true nature with his angry shouts. I looked down at him with a cold, detached gaze. Then, I clearly voiced what was in my heart. I won't give you money, you cheated, and most importantly, you made Mom sad. I called you a dada for Mom's sake, but I've never thought of you as my father. Not then, not now. I had never been this straightforward before, so it must have been unexpected. My father just gawked at me. Also, there's a restraining order against you. Please abide by it.
Goodbye.
Candace. As he reached out his hand, I ignored him and entered the department store with Sophia. My father, who had followed, was caught by the security guards. Sophia and I finally relaxed, seeing this. It seemed that my father was handed over to the police and he mentioned my name. Despite the restraining order, he kept insisting that I would come to pick him up. Sophia was furious and arranged for a lawyer, discussing something with Ben. They wouldn't tell me what it was about. It's just what parents do, Candace. You'll understand soon, don't worry. Reassured by Ben, I decided to wait and see. A few days later, I was told there would be a meeting at my grandparents' house. So I went there with my aunt and uncle. Upon entering the living room, there was my father, Nick, looking completely haggard. And Abby, who had been by his side at my mother's funeral. They both looked scared and trembled upon noticing me. Let's start the discussion. With my grandfather's cue, the atmosphere in the room became tense. The lawyer slowly read out the purpose of today's meeting. Originally, according to my mother's will, there was no compensation claim against my father. And in return, he would not receive any inheritance. However, due to his numerous nuisances, a claim for disturbance charges was being filed instead of compensation for the affair. And against Abby, the mistress, an compensation claim was being made. That was the content of the lawyer's reading. Both my father and Abby turned pale upon hearing it. Additionally, as a separate matter, Nick and Abby have been asked to resign from our company. Can't you reconsider? Abby stood up, panicking at my grandfather's words. His gaze towards her was cold, but she persisted. You know, about the compensation. We won't be able to pay if you fire us, right? That's troubling for you too, isn't it? So firing me is not a wise decision. Abby spoke as if she had a brilliant plan. However, my grandfather's expression remained stern. Realizing this, Abby started to stammer out excuses. Actually, it was Nick who came on to me. How could I refuse a supervisor's advances? It was against my will. Huh? What are you saying? You were the one who came on to me. As Abby began to sob artificially, Nick angrily confronted her. Their argument soon escalated into a shouting match in the living room. Shut up. With a single reprimand from my grandfather, their bickering stopped. The lawyer then spread documents in front of them. Here are the documents regarding the disturbance charges and compensation. Please read them carefully and sign. I can't pay this amount. That's not for you to decide. Cutting off her excuses, Abby reluctantly signed. After signing, she was promptly ushered out of the room. However, my father remained seated, not attempting to sign. Sophia was growing visibly irritated. Then Ben quietly spoke up. Cheating is the worst, isn't it? What are you saying all of a sudden? It's a betrayal, right? Did you know that in some countries, it's a crime? My father's face turned pale upon hearing this. Ben continued to speak with a calm demeanor. Didn't you vow at your wedding to support each other in sickness and in health? Was breaking that vow and hurting your partner enjoyable? My father's mouth opened and closed, but he was unable to speak against Ben's presence. Your wife was the sister of a woman I loved, the mother of a dear child. And my cherished childhood friend. Well, Ben looked straight at my father and smiled gently before delivering his final words. I will never forgive you. Ben didn't shout but spoke gently throughout, which seemed to affect my father more than any yelling could. With his face still pale, my father was frozen, staring at Ben. Ben then gently placed a pen in my father's hand. You can sign, right? Yes. My father, who had always belittled Ben, now spoke to him in a respectful tone, appearing smaller than he ever had when my mother was alive. After signing, he left without looking at us. Later, I heard that he paid the disturbance charges by borrowing money. Ben is managing that money now. My father borrowed from a dangerous place and soon disappeared without a trace. He might be working on a fishing boat somewhere. As harsh as it might be, I can't sympathize with him, it's his own doing. In fact, I sometimes pray that the creditors squeeze him even more. As for Abby, her affair with a married man, and the resulting compensation payments were discovered by her parents, and she was apparently forced to return to the countryside. It seems Abby, who was sent back to her rural hometown, has now been married off to a man 30 years her senior in the village. She's leading a hectic life with no time for rest, caught between caring for her mother-in-law and working on the farm. It appears that this family had been looking for a young bride to serve as a caregiver for some time. I heard that Abby's cries for escape were met with harsh scolding from her parents. Sophia and Ben, as my parents, shower me with love every day. They discipline me strictly, like a real daughter. And on the monthly anniversary of my mother's passing, we visit her grave, eat her favorite foods, and visit her favorite places, creating moments to remember her. Watching Sophia and Ben, so much in love, my desire to have a wonderful marriage like theirs grows even stronger. My relationship with my grandparents is also very good. Recently, they've been talking about building a villa abroad for my possible future studies, which I've been desperately trying to dissuade them from. I am considering studying abroad, but I'm only in the first year of middle school. Right now, I want to enjoy my time in the US with my friends, which I have requested of my grandparents. My grandparents are nearly 80 years old, but they are still incredibly energetic, often going on trips together. With their wedding anniversary approaching, I'm racking my brain about what to give them. As for me, I've been busy lately because a proposal I made in the student council was accepted. There are still many decisions to be made, and some problematic issues remain. Nonetheless, the work is fulfilling, and I find the discussions at school the most enjoyable. At home, I've recently become engrossed in reading French books. Sophia gave me a book that my mother loved, and I'm slowly translating it with an electronic dictionary. The translation process isn't smooth yet, but I find it so enjoyable that I'm considering becoming a translator in the future. For that, I need to study French harder, I asked Sophia. And now I'm attending a cram school for French conversation and comprehension. The loss of my mother was very sad, and I still shed tears whenever I remember her. But I am living in the present, loved by many people. One day, when I go to heaven, I want to tell my mother all about it. With that thought, I've started keeping a diary. I plan to write in it every day to tell my mother about all my successes and failures. Sophia and Ben tell me that it's okay not to forget my mother, and that I don't have to call them mom and dad if it's hard for me. However, to me, Sophia and Ben are like a second set of parents. So, for their upcoming anniversary, I've prepared a gift with a message card that reads, "Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad." I'm excited, imagining how happy they will be. Every morning, the first thing I do is talk to my mother's photo. It's my daily routine. The sky outside is a vast expanse of blue. Maybe my mother is telling me to keep going. Thinking this, I feel happy,